Nothing should be alive nearly 10 kilometers down, under pressure strong enough to crush steel. Viral videos claim footage shows a creature with zero DNA matched to anything on Earth. No scientist or study backs that claim. A real Chinese submersible went down anyway, cameras rolling, looking for nothing in particular. What it found was still moving. The claim that needs checking. A wave of recent videos has spread online describing new Mariana Trench footage showing a creature moving that supposedly should not exist. Some going so far as to claim a genetic test came back with a 0% match to any known species on Earth. None of these videos name the specific research vessel involved, the scientists who reviewed the footage, or a journal where any such genetic result was published. That absence matters enormously, since a genuine 0% DNA match to every known living thing on the planet would represent one of the most significant biological discoveries in modern history, and a finding that dramatic would appear immediately in peer-reviewed science journals and major news outlets, not exclusively in unsourced video descriptions. That does not mean nothing new and genuinely startling has come out of the Mariana Trench recently. Real scientists using real submersibles have filmed real, moving, living creatures deeper than anyone previously confirmed possible, published their findings in serious scientific journals, and named exactly who did the work. Tracing where that genuine science actually comes from starts with understanding how humans first found this trench at all, more than a century before anyone had a submersible capable of actually visiting it. The Ship That Found the Hole, by accident. On March 23, 1875, a British Royal Navy vessel called the HMS Challenger, converted specifically into a dedicated scientific research ship, was conducting a routine depth sounding in the western Pacific Ocean, southwest of the Mariana Islands, using nothing more advanced than a weighted rope lowered over the side. Unlike the countless other soundings the crew had already taken during their long voyage, this particular rope simply kept falling. After nearly 27,000 feet, roughly 5 miles, it finally hit bottom, marking humanity's first documented encounter with what would eventually become known as the Mariana Trench. That single sounding, taken almost by accident during a 4-year global research voyage that ran from December 1872 to May 1876, recorded a depth of 4,475 fathoms, or about 8,184 meters, at the time the deepest point ever measured anywhere in the ocean. Led by naturalists John Murray and Charles Wyville Thomson, the Challenger expedition ultimately covered more than 68,000 nautical miles, gathered observations from 362 separate stations, and discovered roughly 4,700 new species of plants and animals along the way. Results so extensive that the full scientific report eventually ran to 50 separate volumes and nearly 30,000 printed pages. Even in mud samples pulled up from that same record-breaking depth, the crew found tiny single-celled organisms called radiolaria, meaning humans had already confirmed some form of life existed at the bottom of this exact trench well over a century before anyone could actually travel down there themselves. 75 years later, in 1951, a different ship, HMS Challenger 2, returned to the same general area using stronger, more advanced sonar and explosive charge-based depth soundings, measuring an even deeper point nearby at roughly 10,863 meters. That second deeper measurement is what officially cemented the name Challenger Deep for the specific deepest section of the trench, honoring the original 1875 expedition that had stumbled onto this same stretch of ocean floor by patient, unglamorous rope and sounding weight alone. The handful of people who have actually been there for 85 years after that original 1875 sounding, nobody had any way to actually travel down and see the Challenger Deep firsthand. That changed on January 23, 1960, when Swiss oceanographer Jacques Piccard and United States Navy officer Don Walsh piloted a bathyscaphe called the Trieste down to the bottom, becoming the first human beings to ever reach the deepest point in any ocean. The descent and return took roughly 5 hours, and partway down, the outer plexiglass viewing window actually cracked under the extreme pressure. A genuinely dangerous moment the two men survived only because the vessel's structure held together long enough to complete the dive safely. Piccard later reported spotting what he described as a flatfish resting on the seafloor. though later researchers studying the account have suggested it may actually have been a sea cucumber instead. A small correction that still leaves the core finding intact, genuine, visible life existing at the absolute bottom of the ocean. Nobody returned to the Challenger Deep for more than 50 years after that single, harrowing dive. In March 2012, filmmaker James Cameron changed that, piloting a specially built solo submersible called the Deep Sea Challenger, designed and engineered by Australian cave diving expert Ron Allam, using a specialized material called ISOFLOAT, capable of withstanding the crushing compressive forces at that depth. Cameron spent roughly 3 hours on the seafloor, collecting samples and recording three-dimensional video footage, later describing the environment directly as something close to traveling through an alien landscape, a genuinely desolate world unlike anywhere else on the planet, and one that also demanded, in his own words, dedicated, like-minded, brilliant misfits, willing to help design and build a vessel capable of surviving the trip at all. Uncrewed robotic vehicles filled in some of the decades between those two milestone human dives. Japan's Kaiko, an unmanned submersible operated by the Japan Agency for Marine Earth Science and Technology, conducted more than 250 separate dives to Hadal depths between 1995 and 2003, collecting roughly 350 distinct biological species, including 180 different types of bacteria, some of which researchers have studied for potential medical and industrial applications, before Kaiko was tragically lost at sea in 2003 during a typhoon when its connecting cable snapped. China's own Haido-1 robotic vehicle reached 10,767 meters in 2016, and Russia's Vityaz-D reached 10,028 meters in 2020, adding 2 more nations to the short, exclusive list of countries capable of reaching Hadal depths at all. China had already fielded an earlier crewed vehicle too, a submersible called Jiaolong, capable of diving to roughly 7,500 meters, that first entered service in 2010 and represented the country's initial serious push into deep-sea research before Fendosia eventually surpassed it. If you're enjoying this deep dive, hitting subscribe means you won't miss the next one. The submersible that found a city of life. The most significant recent crewed vehicle to join this same exclusive list is a Chinese submersible called Fendosia, meaning striver, built by the China State Shipbuilding Corporation and operated by the Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering, part of the Chinese Academy of Sciences. The vessel weighs roughly 36 long tons, carries a crew of 3, and is specifically designed to reach depths of more than 10,000 meters, equipped with 2 mechanical arms, 7 separate underwater cameras, 7 sonar systems, and hydraulic drills for collecting samples directly from the seafloor. On November 10, 2020, Fendosia carried 3 Chinese scientists, Zhang Wei, Zhao Yang, and Wang Zhiqiang, to the bottom of the Challenger Deep, reaching a depth of 10,909 meters, while live streaming the entire descent, becoming China's first crewed vessel to touch the true bottom of the Mariana Trench. The vessel officially entered regular scientific service in March 2021, and by December 2024, had already completed a total of 336 separate dives, a genuinely extensive operational record for a vehicle built specifically to survive some of the most extreme pressure conditions found anywhere on the planet. In July 2025, a team of researchers led by scientists at that same Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering published a study in the journal Nature, describing something nobody expected to find at the bottom of the Mariana Trench and a neighboring trench called the Kermadec. Using that same Fendosia submersible, the team discovered thousands of worms and mollusks living at depths approaching 10 kilometers, forming what researchers described as the deepest colony of animals ever directly observed anywhere on Earth. The animals that shouldn't have been there at all. The footage itself shows dense clusters of tube worms and clam-like mollusks, called vesicomyid bivalves, packed together across the seafloor in numbers dense enough that researchers nicknamed one specific area clam bed. Lead researchers, including Mengran Du, described the experience of diving to that depth and encountering this much visible life as something close to traveling through time, unveiling a hidden world layer by layer with each descent. The study's authors wrote directly that Hadal trenches, the technical term for the very deepest ocean trenches, had long been proposed as potential habitats for this exact kind of life, but that actual, confirmed documentation of a community this large living at this depth had remained exceptionally rare before this specific expedition. That detail, real, moving, living animals captured on camera, exactly where conventional assumptions said almost nothing should survive, is the genuine version of the story these vague viral videos are circling around without ever citing the actual source. Understanding exactly why finding this much life, this deep, genuinely surprised scientists requires understanding what these particular animals are actually living on, since it has nothing to do with sunlight at all. Why this shouldn't be possible. Almost every food chain across the surface of Earth ultimately traces back to sunlight, since plants and algae use it to produce energy that feeds everything else up the chain. Nearly 10 kilometers down in the Mariana Trench, sunlight has never once reached in the entire history of the planet, meaning any thriving community of animals living there needs an entirely different energy source to survive at all. The worms and mollusks discovered by the Fendosia team survive through a process called chemosynthesis, drawing energy directly from methane seeping up through cracks in the seafloor rather than from anything connected to the sun. Researchers studying the site found that these seeps supply a steady, reliable source of chemical energy that specialized bacteria can convert into usable nutrients that the worms and mollusks then rely on directly, some housing these same bacteria inside their own bodies in a close, mutually beneficial relationship. That specific combination, a genuine seafloor ecosystem built around chemical energy from the Earth's crust itself rather than sunlight, existing at a depth and pressure most researchers assumed could barely support any complex animal life at all, is exactly what makes this discovery scientifically significant, without needing any invented claim about an unidentifiable creature to make the story compelling. The research team's own conclusion pointed towards something genuinely important for how much more of the ocean remains unexplored, stating plainly that this discovery suggests considerably more life may be thriving in extreme hostile conditions at the bottom of the planet's oceans than scientists had previously assumed. That same basic theme, life surviving and even thriving somewhere researchers assumed depth and pressure made survival essentially impossible, showed up again just a few months later, in a completely different trench, through a discovery involving an actual fish caught swimming and feeding on camera. The fish that swam deeper than anyone thought possible. In November 2025, researchers announced that a team led by Professor Alan Jameson of the Mandaroo UWA Deep Sea Research Center had filmed a species of snailfish, part of the genus Pseudoleparus, alive and swimming at a depth of 8,336 meters in the Izu Ogasawara Trench, a deep trench located near Japan, not far from the Mariana Trench itself. That depth broke the previous confirmed record for the deepest living fish ever filmed, a record that had itself been set at 8,178 meters inside the Mariana Trench. The footage actually captured back in 2023 during an expedition Jameson led before being fully analyzed and published shows the small fish, measuring only 20 to 25 centimeters long, actively feeding on small crustaceans that live by scavenging decaying organic material drifting down from the surface far above. Jameson described the striking gap between expectation and reality directly to The Guardian, explaining that when most people picture what the deepest fish in the world should look like, they imagine something gnarly, black, with big teeth and small eyes, when the reality captured on camera was a small, pale, almost delicate-looking animal instead. That specific detail, real footage of a real, living, actively feeding fish captured swimming at a depth deeper than any fish had ever been confirmed to survive before, is exactly the kind of genuinely startling, well-documented discovery that fits the spirit of new deep trench footage, showing something moving that defies previous assumptions, without needing any invented, unsourced claim layered on top of it. Understanding how any fish, or any animal at all, can survive functioning at that kind of crushing pressure requires looking at the specific biology deep-sea creatures have evolved to make it possible. The science of surviving that kind of pressure. Water pressure increases by roughly 1 atmosphere for every 10 meters traveled downward, meaning by the time you reach depths approaching 8 or 9 kilometers, the The total pressure pushing in from every direction runs well over 1,000 times what a person feels standing at sea level. Scientists studying how any soft-bodied animal survives that kind of crushing force at all have identified a specific class of natural chemical compounds called piezolites, including one called trimethylamine oxide, that build up inside the cells of deep-sea fish and other creatures living at extreme depths. These compounds help keep proteins inside an animal's cells stable and properly folded even as outside pressure tries to force them apart at the molecular level, essentially acting as a kind of internal chemical reinforcement. Researchers have documented a striking pattern across multiple deep-sea species studied so far. The deeper a fish tends to live, the more of this specific stabilizing compound its tissue generally contains, almost as though there is a real, measurable biological ceiling on how deep any fish can survive, based on how much of this protective chemistry its body is able to hold before its own cells would otherwise start failing under the strain. That same basic biological toolkit, rather than anything resembling an unidentified DNA-defying organism, is what actually lets animals like Jameson's newly filmed snailfish and the worms and mollusks discovered by the Fendouge team survive and actively function at depths that would instantly destroy an ordinary surface-dwelling animal. That real, well-documented survival chemistry sits at the center of a whole category of strange, genuinely confirmed creatures living throughout the Mariana Trench and nearby Hadal zones, several of which are just as surprising as anything a vague viral video could invent. What else has been found moving down there? Sharing the same general depth zone as these newly documented discoveries is a creature called Alicella gigantea, nicknamed the supergiant amphipod. Ordinary amphipods, the small shrimp-like creatures found in nearly every body of water on Earth, rarely grow past 1 centimeter long. This specific species grows past 30 centimeters, 20 to 30 times larger than its ordinary relatives, and has been recorded at depths ranging from around 3,890 meters all the way down to nearly 8,931 meters. Genetic studies have suggested a single global population of this exact species may stretch across more than half the world's oceans, showing up in trenches thousands of kilometers apart while still carrying nearly identical DNA, a genuinely remarkable finding on its own that required no invented monster to make interesting. An even stranger resident lives in these same depths, one most people would never guess even counts as a single animal at all. Xenophyophores are single-celled organisms, essentially giant amoebas roughly the size of a mango, holding the scientific record for the largest single cell known anywhere in nature. A Scripps Institution of Oceanography expedition documented these organisms living at depths up to 10,641 meters inside a section of the Mariana Trench called the Serena Deep, breaking the previous known depth record for the species by nearly 2 miles. These unusual cells function almost like tiny apartment buildings, hosting a variety of smaller organisms directly inside their own structure, and researchers studying them have found they concentrate heavy metals like lead, uranium, and mercury from the surrounding water at unusually high levels, likely as a side effect of how they filter tiny particles out of the water for food. None of these confirmed, genuinely documented creatures resemble anything close to a monster or an organism defying DNA analysis. They are small, strange, and built entirely around surviving crushing pressure and total darkness, rather than dominating anything through size or mystery. That alone might sound like reassuring news about what actually lives down there, proof that nothing genuinely unexplainable is hiding at the bottom of the trench. A separate, very real discovery from the past decade shows that the actual unsettling material found moving through these depths has nothing to do with any animal at all. The human contamination already down there. In 2017, a research team led by Alan Jameson, the same scientist who later confirmed the record-breaking snailfish footage, published a study in the journal Nature, Ecology, and Evolution examining small, shrimp-like scavengers called amphipods pulled up from both the Mariana Trench and the Kermadec Trench, two trenches sitting roughly 7,000 kilometers apart on opposite sides of the Pacific Ocean. That geographic spread made the results considerably harder to dismiss as some kind of isolated local accident. Testing revealed extraordinarily high levels of persistent organic pollutants inside the fatty tissue of these creatures, specifically polychlorinated biphenyls, known as PCBs, and polybrominated diphenyl ethers, chemicals used for decades as electrical insulators and flame retardants before PCBs were banned worldwide starting in the late 1970s, due to their links with cancer. The most contaminated amphipod samples pulled from the Mariana Trench carried PCB levels roughly 50 times higher than crabs studied in one of the most polluted rivers in China. Jamieson said publicly at the time that his team had always assumed the deep ocean was remote and pristine, safe from meaningful human impact, and that these specific results showed that assumption could not have been further from the truth. The amphipod species involved, called Hirondelia gigas, survives by scavenging almost any organic material that sinks down from the surface, meaning it consumes whatever drifts down through more than 10 kilometers of open water, banned industrial chemicals included. That is a genuinely disturbing, thoroughly documented example of something moving through the deepest parts of the Mariana Trench that should never have reached there, human-made pollution, rather than any mysterious organism. And it arrived decades before most scientists ever thought to check for it specifically. That same growing scientific attention on exactly what lives and what has ended up at the bottom of these trenches has run directly into a separate, very current real-world debate over who gets to disturb that same deep seafloor next. Why this research matters for deep-sea mining. The July 2025 discovery of thriving chemosynthesis-based life at nearly 10 kilometers depth arrived at a genuinely significant moment, publishing right as multiple nations continue actively negotiating over the contested issue of deep-sea mining. China, the United States, and other countries have expressed serious interest in mining the deep ocean floor for valuable minerals, and ocean scientists have warned repeatedly that mining these largely unexplored depths, among the last genuinely wild environments left on the planet, could seriously damage fragile ecosystems that researchers are still only beginning to properly understand and document. The International Seabed Authority, the international body responsible for overseeing deep-sea mining conducted in international waters, has not yet adopted the long-awaited formal rules meant to govern this exact industry, even as interest in the practice continues growing. Separate Chinese media reporting has described the same Fendoja submersible mission involved in discovering this newly documented deep-sea community as also being connected to research specifically focused on deep-sea materials, adding a real, practical layer of urgency to understanding exactly what lives at these depths before any large-scale mining activity potentially begins disturbing them. That tension, genuine new scientific discovery arriving at the same moment industrial interest in that same deep seafloor is accelerating, is a real, well-documented current issue, considerably more consequential than any invented claim about an unidentifiable creature moving through the dark. How rare a trip this deep actually is. Since the very first attempt in 1960, the pace of crewed visits to the Challenger Deep has genuinely accelerated in recent years, though it remains an extraordinarily rare achievement by any reasonable comparison. Between April and May 2019, explorer Victor Vescovo piloted a submersible called the DSV Limiting Factor on 4 separate crewed dives to the bottom of the Challenger Deep as part of a program called the 5 Deeps Expedition, a broader effort to reach the deepest point of each of the world's 5 oceans within a single continuous mission, a feat no other explorer had ever attempted before. Vescovo returned for 6 more completed dives between June and July 2020, 5 additional dives between March and April 2021, and 9 further descents during the summer of 2022, taking along a rotating list of passengers that eventually included former NASA astronaut Kathy Sullivan, making her the first person in history to have both walked in space and visited the deepest point on Earth. Even accounting for that entire recent burst of activity, official counts placed the total number of people who had ever descended to the Challenger Deep at only 27 as of July 2022. A genuinely tiny number for a location humans have now known about for a century and a half. That scarcity is precisely why every additional crewed and uncrewed mission down into these depths carries real scientific weight, and why genuine discoveries like the Fendoja team's newly documented chemosynthesis community or Jamieson's record-breaking snailfish footage represent such rare, hard-won additions to an extremely short list of confirmed, first-hand observations from the bottom of the ocean. What scientists still don't know. Despite these genuinely significant recent discoveries, researchers remain honest about how much of the deep ocean floor still remains completely unexplored. An international mapping effort called Seabed 2030 has spent years working to chart the entire ocean floor to modern standards, and by 2025, that project had only reached roughly 27% coverage worldwide, up from just 6% when the effort first began in 2017. That pace means the vast majority of the world's deep seafloor, including enormous stretches of Hadal trenches like the Mariana and its neighbors, has never been directly observed by any human being or any deep-sea vehicle at all. Researchers studying the newly discovered chemosynthesis community at nearly 10 kilometers depth have acknowledged directly that many basic questions about this specific ecosystem remain open, including exactly how widespread similar communities might be across other unexplored trenches, how these specific worm and mollusk populations first arrived at such an isolated extreme depth, and how long a community this dense might have taken to actually establish itself there. Similarly, Jameson's own record-breaking snailfish discovery raises its own open question, since finding a living, actively feeding fish at 8,336 meters immediately raises the possibility that fish, or animals resembling them, might survive at even greater depths still, in stretches of Hadal Trench nobody has yet managed to properly film. That same honest, openly acknowledged uncertainty, genuine cutting-edge discovery, paired with an enormous, still unexplored remainder of the deep ocean floor, is precisely the real, unresolved scientific frontier that continues driving expeditions back down into these trenches, using named researchers, published studies, and verifiable footage, rather than anything resembling an unsourced claim about an unidentifiable organism. Verdict here is where things actually stand. Humans first discovered the Mariana Trench almost by accident in 1875. When the HMS Challenger's crew lowered a weighted rope that kept falling for nearly 5 miles, and the site would not see its first human visitors for another 85 years, until Jacques Piccard and Don Walsh's harrowing 1960 dive aboard the Trieste. In July 2025, a Chinese research team led by scientists at the Institute of Deep Sea Science and Engineering used the submersible Fendouzja, a vehicle that has now completed hundreds of dives since 2021, to film thousands of worms and mollusks living at depths approaching 10 kilometers in the Mariana and Kermadec trenches, the deepest confirmed animal colony ever directly observed, surviving through chemosynthesis on methane seeping through cracks in the seafloor. In November 2025, a team led by Professor Alan Jameson confirmed footage of a snailfish actively feeding at 8,336 meters in the nearby Izu-Ogasawara Trench, breaking the previous depth record for a living fish, which had itself been set inside the Mariana Trench at 8,178 meters. Both discoveries relied on named scientists, specific research institutions, and formal publication in peer-reviewed journals including Nature, standing in sharp contrast to recent viral videos claiming new Mariana Trench footage shows an unidentified creature with a 0% DNA match, claims that cite no scientist, no institution, and no published study anywhere. Separately, genuine, well-documented research, led by the same Alan Jameson, has confirmed that banned industrial chemicals called PCBs have already reached amphipods living at the bottom of the Mariana Trench at levels 50 times higher than some of the most polluted rivers on Earth. A real, thoroughly verified example of something that should never have traveled that deep, actually doing exactly that. Even with the recent burst of dives led by explorer Victor Vescovo and his 5 Deeps expedition, only 27 people had ever reached the Challenger Deep as of mid-2022, underscoring just how rare and hard-won each genuine piece of first-hand evidence from that depth actually is. None of what real cameras have actually filmed moving through the Mariana Trench and its neighboring Hadal depths required inventing an unidentifiable organism. It required patient, well-funded, carefully documented scientific expeditions, stretching back to a single lucky rope sounding in 1875, willing to keep going back down into total darkness at crushing pressure, and coming back with real footage of real, living creatures nobody had ever confirmed could survive quite that deep before. If this kind of deep ocean mystery is your thing, subscribing helps more of these stories reach you the moment they come out.